Hello and welcome to the second part of this webinar with Ado Kukic. We're talking about building modern apps with Next.js and MongoDB. So I'll just add Ado in. Hello, Ado.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Hello again. Let's get into it real quickly. So let me just share your screen. So you can go ahead like last time, and I'll just keep watching for any comments or questions. So go
Sounds
ahead.
perfect. Sweet. Well, thank you for having me back, and thank you to everyone for joining in. So, if you recall, we did a stream last week where we talked about building apps with Next.js and MongoDB, and we were making pretty good progress. We got almost to the end, and then we hit a roadblock. And our roadblock was we were trying to navigate to a dynamic link. So, and let me zoom in a little bit. So we were trying to log in, or not log in, we were trying to navigate to a dynamic page using the Next.js framework, and we couldn't figure out a way with the new way of things in Next.js from version 9.3 on how to get that parameter, make the data call to MongoDB, get that data, and then render it. And so that was totally my fault because I didn't read the docs for 9.3. I was still stuck in the old way of doing things. So today, I just kind of wanted to revisit that, fix it, and then we can actually learn a couple new things about Next.js. So with that said, let's dive right in. And before I get into making the code changes in our application, I want to talk about the data fetching capabilities of Next.js and kind of what's changed from version 9.3 to the current latest 9.4 and the foreseeable future. So prior to version 9.3, Next.js had exposed a method for fetching data called GetInitialProps that would allow you to fetch data essentially at build time with server-side rendering. And that worked great, for a time, but due to, many developers using Next.js to build applications, and the Next.js team always being really great at figuring out how to give us more ways to work with our data, giving us the flexibility, giving us additional power to build really, really good modern apps. They introduced a couple of changes to how we fetch data. So now there's really two different ways that we can fetch data ahead of time. We can always do it the traditional React way where, we can use React hooks, for example, use effect when a component loads to go and fetch the data. But Next.js also provides these three new methods called GetStaticProps, GetStaticPaths, and GetServerSideProps. And there is a very big difference between GetStaticProps and GetServerSideProps. And the difference is if you use the GetStaticProps method, what this is going to do is it is going to fetch the data at build time. So when you go to deploy your application, when Next.js built your app, it's going to go and build that page, pre-render it, and essentially generate an HTML page with the content already loaded in. Now, this is really, really great for performance. It's going to make sure that your page loads really, really quickly. All the data is pre-rendered. It's not going to make a call to a database or to an external data source. It's already going to have that data. But the downside of that is your data is not going to be automatically refreshed. So, if you do use GetStaticProps, the page will load much faster, but it's not going to be automatically updated. And you can, after the fact, after the page loads, if you wanted to use React hooks or use a different method to go and see if there's new data and rebuild the component then. That's one way of doing it. But for our purposes, I think we're going to want to use the GetServerSideProps method instead. And what the GetServerSideProps method does is it's going to do server-side rendering, and it's going to fetch the data on each and every request. So this is going to make our application behave more like a traditional web application, where you make a request from your browser to the server renders all the HTML, all the data, kind of generates a template, and then sends it to the browser for final rendering. Now, again, this is a really good way to get data. And it's, with Next.js, it is still fast, but it is going to have to go and make a database call every single time now. Now, we can do, things to speed it up, like, CDN caching or caching our database queries. But if you do need, if your data is going to be constantly changing, or you always want to get the latest data, then using GetServerSideProps is another way to do that. And then to very briefly go into the GetStaticProps method, what this method does is it allows us to pre-render dynamic routes. So just like how we can use GetStaticProps to generate our HTML pages ahead of time for like our about page or blog content, you can use the GetStaticPaths to go to your database and get all of the additional pages that you may want to render, and render those ahead of time as well, so in that case, your application is going to have all of the data, all of the data from the database rendered way ahead of time, and it's going to give you much faster performance. So the GetStaticPaths will tell Next.js, what your data is going to look like, give you that data, and then you're going to use GetStaticProps to build each individual page. So that's kind of the difference between the two. And what we had done in our code was we were incorrectly using GetStaticProps in trying to generate this dynamic page, but we weren't using GetStaticPaths. So that didn't work. And then we tried to use the traditional React way by using the useEffect React hook. And I was also running into issues with that, with getting the router data. So I thought, why don't we actually go ahead and use the GetServerSideProps method instead, so that we can render our pages server-side. So we still get a performance boost. Our pages still rendered really good for SEO purposes. So that's what I want to do. So we can go here on the GetServerSideProps method and just copy the kind of starter function. So I will do that down here. So essentially, this is an async function. We export it, and we have to name it GetServerSideProps. And everything from here, Next.js is going to handle for us. So all we do now is write our implementation logic. And this context variable here that gets passed in gives us a couple of different things. So if we just wanted to, console log that out, we can see what is exposed, or we can take a look at the docs. So we have, within the context parameter, we have our params, which are any dynamic parameters we pass into a route. We have our request and response objects that come from Next.js. Our query string. So if you're working with, if you're passing in additional data via the URL, and then some additional data points here. But since we are working with a dynamic route here, using this params, this params object is going to be what we're going to do. And we can actually destructure our context here. So rather than passing in context like this and then going context.params, what we can do is, instead of passing in the context, we'll just destructure it and say we just want the parameters. So now we can use our params like so. Now, what we're going to do here in this GetServerSideProps function, and let me zoom in a little bit so that it's easier to see. And let's see if there's any messages in the comments. There doesn't appear to be. So we have our GetServerSideProps method here. We're ready to implement it. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to fetch data from our getSingleGif API endpoint. And if you recall, we hard-coded this one here because we just wanted to show something. So let's actually go into our application here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say const response, and we're going to fetch. So we're going to fetch HTTP localhost 3000 into our API get GIFs route, and then we're going to, or let's actually get GIF. So I can actually just copy this guy right here. Make sure we're doing it right. So we have our localhost 3000, get GIF, and then we're passing in a query parameter or a query, yeah, a query route with an ID, and that's going to be our ID here. But since we're getting it from the params, it's going to actually be params.id. And so once we've done this fetch, which is actually an async await, so we'll add the await keyword so that we don't have to get into writing a bunch of then statements. Then we're going to get our GIF data from this response. We're just going to get the JSON from it, and then we're going to pass it in as a prop. So we'll say data equals our GIF. And then all the way up here in our default, I call it data, yep. We're just going to get past that data prop. And now I can delete all of this stuff. Actually, we'll leave the GIF info as is. And let's just console log our data to make sure that it is what we expect. And actually what we can do here, probably in the use effect, we can call setGIF and pass in our data. That way our GIF item gets properly hydrated. So we are good there. And now I think we should be able to go into our application, refresh, and see what happens. Okay, so we get another error serializing data returned from GetServerSideProps. Oh, so the issue was we also need to await this one, because that is also a promise rather than getting the data directly. So we'll refresh now, and we get what we expect. So all we're doing here in our template so far is we just want to render the GIF URL. So if everything works correctly, we should get a GIF URL. So I'll refresh here, and we do. So far, so good. Now, the next thing I want to do is let's actually, rather than hard coding this item here, let's actually use the ID that we pass in. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to rely on this request property. And just to, I believe it's going to be just console log request. I think it's query. But let's double check that just to make sure we're on the right path. So we'll refresh. And yep, so request query .id is what we want. So this object ID here is going to be our request query ID. So now we can delete this, rebuild our application, refresh, and we do get a different GIF. So if we go back to the home page and see all of our GIFs, if we click on any of them, so let's say this Patrick Star one, let's copy it and make sure we get the right one, and we do. So let's just confirm that one more time by clicking another one, just to show you that this is all live. Copy and paste, and it works. Great. So now we have our homepage that displays a list of all of the GIFs from our MongoDB database. And now we have a working dynamic route with our Next.js application where you can click into any of the GIFs and see additional information on that particular GIF. So far, so good. So the next thing I want to do is actually build out this page so that we can see that GIF, we can see the captions for it, and then upvote or downvote the captions as we see fit. So the way we're going to do that is, let's go back into our component here, and we can remove this h1. Remember, this is an application that I built for my talk or workshop at MongoDB Live. So I have the React component built out, and I think it might be easier to just copy that component, copy its contents, and then we can walk through the changes. So let's do, I think we should do that. So I'm going to copy a bunch of code here, and I will walk through all of it. So don't be startled if you see a bunch of code added randomly. And then we're going to remove the form because we're not going to add the ability to add a caption here. But I think everything else can stay. So we're going to have, so essentially what we have here is we're using Tailwind CSS for our UI. So we're creating a container, setting it in the center, and then adding some padding. And then we're creating a, so we're going to use Flexbox for our layout, and we're going to have half the page be the GIF with the latest caption, or the most upvoted caption. And then the second half of the screen is going to be all of the other captions for that GIF. So we have our GIF captions. Remember, that's an array. So we're going to map over it and then display the caption text as well as the number of votes that the caption had received. And then we're going to allow the user to either plus, so upvote a GIF, or downvote a GIF. And we have to implement a couple of functions here. We have to implement the vote function. And I think that might be the only one. So for right now, let's just stub it out. We'll say vote. Let's see, how are we going to do this? So we'll say const vote. It's going to be a function. And for right now, we'll just console log vote. So we haven't implemented this functionality yet. And looks like we have a build error. So let's see where we messed up. So I'm going to copy the div again. And let's delete this guy completely. Whoa. So we'll just do this. And then, okay, I see what we did wrong. Then we'll paste it in here. And then we'll remove the form. Now we have compiled successfully. We are looking good. So now if we look at our page, we see that it automatically refreshed because we made the changes. So now we see our GIF, the highest upvoted caption for it. So in this case, this little kitten GIF has the caption of Monday mood. And then we have the caption and all the other captions for it, as well as the number of upvotes that they have received. And for right now, we see 62, 1, and 7. So they are out of order. We'll fix that. And then we see the upvote and downvote buttons so that you as a user can either upvote or downvote the captions that you like or don't like. So looking good there. Before I continue, let me take a quick look at the chat to see if there are any questions. Doesn't look like there are, so we will continue. So the next thing we need to implement is our vote functionality. And for the vote functionality, what we're going to do is we're going to allow a user to either hit the plus button to increment the count by 1, or hit the minus button to decrement the count by 1. So we'll go into our code here, and we have a function called vote that takes our GIF ID. So it's going to go into our GIF object, get its ID, transform it to a string. We have the caption that we want to upvote, and then either a 1, meaning we want to increment it, or a -1, meaning that we want to decrement that function. So let's go ahead and implement our vote function. We have our GIF ID, we have the caption that we want to increment or decrement, and then we have the direction, whether we're going up or down. Get rid of that console log statement. And what we're going to do in here is we're going to call a vote. So how should we do this? We could do it a couple of different ways. One of the ways we can do it is to create. So first of all, we're going to need another API endpoint to capture the result of this vote. So let's go ahead and implement that first. So we'll go in here in our API, and we're going to create a new route. So I'm just going to copy the data here, and we'll say vote.js. Copy and paste our connected database. And so we're going to await, get our database connection, and then we're going to vote on this GIF. And the way that we're going to implement this is we're going to go into our database collection, GIFs, and instead of the find method, here we can delete this. We're going to run an update one command. And what the update one command is going to do is it's going to find a specific document that we query on, and it's going to allow us to update some of the data for it. So we're going to run update one, and the first parameter that we pass into update one is going to be our query criteria for which document we want. And in our case, that's going to be our ID. So we're going to query on the ID, and we're going to search by object ID. And see how we did that here. So we did object ID. Let's query ID. Let's make sure that we're doing this right. Oh, our ID is just going to be probably erase it. So actually, I think I have an extra pair here and here, so we don't need that. So we are querying, and let me move this on its own line so it's a little bit easier to see. So we're going to find, first of all, our GIF with the ID that matches the ID that we pass into it. But then we're also going to want to find the specific caption that we want to increment or decrement. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to go into the captions array and evaluate its text. So we have the text, and we're going to say here, request query the caption text. So that's going to give us our document from MongoDB that we want to interact with. So our first stage is finding the document we want to work with. And then the second parameter that we're going to pass into this update one command is going to be what we want to update. And what we want to update is either to increase or decrease the count of our the upvoted caption. So MongoDB has a handy operator for that called inc or increment. And what we're going to increment on is our captions $ votes. We're going to increment that in the request query direction that we give it. Let's save this just so that it prettier kind of cleans up our code a little bit. The reason we're passing in this captions $$ is this is going to help us figure out which caption we are incrementing based on the caption text up here. And that's all we need to do here. We're going to get a response. What we can do is we could just respond with that response. So I'm not going to do any sort of error handling for the time being. But if we do run into issues, then we'll go back and do a try catch and try to capture the error. So now we have that specific API endpoint implemented. We have our call to update one to find the document and upvote it in a specific direction. So I think we're ready now to go into our vote here and call that, make that call and see if it works successfully. So here I'll actually just make a fetch call. We're going to go into localhost 3000 API vote, and we're going to pass in our query parameters. And actually, let's do it this way. I'm going to use the string literals so that it's a little bit easier to pass our data. So we're passing in our, let's see, we want the ID, the text, and direction. So we'll start with the ID equals ID, and our caption equals $caption, and our direction equals $direction. And then since this is a synchronous function, we're going to do a then, and we'll just get the response that we get. We'll console log it for now just to see what we get back. And with that said, we should also update our GIF information. Wait, are we going to get the GIF back? Let's see how we did this here. Caption get single GIF. Oh, I guess the way that I had implemented it is, so we make the fetch, we update the information, and then in the then, we're going to make another fetch request that's going to get the updated data from the MongoDB database. So in here, we can copy all of this, and we'll say, instead of vote, we're going to get GIF, and it's going to pass its ID. The ID is going to be the original ID. And then from here, I guess this probably should have been an async function so that we don't get into this chain of thens, but let's just leave that there. Let's console log this data, and I believe it's just going to be our GIF. So we can call set GIF data here. But we're going to run this and make sure that it works properly. So let's go ahead and do that now. And before I continue, I'm going to check the comments to see if there's any questions. There don't appear to be any, so we can continue. So I'll refresh the page here. And moment of truth, fingers crossed. Let's try to upvote one of the GIFs. All right, so we got a spectacular crash. And the reason for that is we made a fetch request, but then what we need to do is with this data, we want to get its JSON, which is also thenable. Because by default, calling this JSON method, it returns a promise as well. So I think with that, we should be good. Oh, and then within our vote here, rather than this, we could type it out. So let's try to do this again. We'll refresh and hit +1. So we get an internal server error, and that is because, oh, well, first of all, we need object ID from MongoDB here. And the other issue is this caption here is an object, so we need to stringify it. Caption so that we can pass it in a query parameter. And then in here, did we call it text? Oh, we didn't. Text. Is JSON. So that should work. Go back into our code, refresh, and moment of truth again. We get an internal server error. So I guess we should do let's do a try. And we'll catch the error. And we'll console log it. Oh, and actually, let's see here. What we should do, rather than setting the entire caption and doing the JSON stringify, we can just get the actual string. So that should be caption.text. And then we would need to do a JSON parse here. And that should work better. So let's try that now. We'll refresh. Upvote. Well, let's see what the error was. Cannot increment non-numeric argument. Oh, okay. So we're getting closer. This direction, we're going to want to make it a number. And let's see now. There we go. So that is incrementing our vote, but we still do get an error saying response. Oh, we're gonna this in the try that we don't error out. So now everything works as expected. Oop, we don't want the event stream. Let's go ahead and clear the console. So increment, and we don't get any issues. If we look at the response, we get the response from MongoDB saying that one document was, saying that we found one document, we modified one document, and then all the other information regarding that call. So far so good. We are able to upvote and downvote GIFs. And if we go back to the homepage here, let's pick another one that potentially has less votes. So this Star Wars one, this is an interesting one because we have our counts here laser tag has more. It has 6, while Star Wars only has 5. But Star Wars is displayed as the dominant caption. So let's also fix that. And the way we're going to do this is where is that? Oh, right here. So we're going to say when we get our data, so we can close this now. Right here, we're going to get our GIF captions, and we're going to sort them in ascending order. And we're going to do this, for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to do it within the client. But as a homework assignment, I think it would be really cool for you guys to try out the MongoDB aggregation pipeline and see how you can do this server side and get the captions sent directly from MongoDB in the correct order. So I'll leave that as an exercise or as a point of discussion for later for you guys. And happy to follow up with that as well to make sure that we get the right information. But adding that that sort function, now we see the laser tag is the first one because it has the most votes. And if we give Star Wars more votes, do it up to 10, for example, then we see the Star Wars takes its place back. So I can do that. And then one other thing we haven't tested is the downvote functionality, which should work pretty much the same way. And it does. So that works great. And what else can we test here? So if we go back into our app, Star Wars is the #1. And if we go here, make laser tag the first one, if we go back to the home page, we're still going to see Star Wars as being the top comment or the top caption. And the reason for this is because with the homepage function, what we are doing is we're using the GetStaticProps method. So this data was already retrieved from the API at build time. So it's not going to update again until we refresh the data. I believe that's correct. Search GIFs. So to change that, if we wanted to get static props, change the method from GetStaticProps to the GetServerSideProps, it should update accordingly. So let's go back into our code here. Everything else can remain the same. All we're changing is the name of the method and letting Next.js do the work for us. So now if we go back, refresh, we should see new data. Let's see, Star Wars laser tag. What am I doing wrong here? Let's try another one. So no is the most up-to-date one, and yes is less updated. But if we go into the home page, we do see yes as the item here. So maybe I'm not doing the sorting like I should. Let me just validate that. Oh yeah, that is correct. So I forgot to run the sort command on the home page as well. So that's why we're seeing that difference. But basically, if we were to drop that GIF captions item on the homepage as well, then it would work. But just for sake of time, I think we can. I think we're good at this point. Are there any questions in the comments? Let's check that. So there don't appear to be any questions, but just to kind of summarize, let's very quickly go over what we built and how we did it. So We used MongoDB as our data store, and MongoDB held all of our GIF data, all of the captions, and all of that stuff, our entire backend essentially. And then we used Next.js as our modern framework for building really powerful applications using the best of React, the best of Node.js, kind of summed up into one very declarative framework. And our code, it was quite simple. We have our pages directory that specifies the different pages of our Next.js application. And within here, there is just a couple different rules. Every page, every file that we create gets its own page. So we have an index for our home page, and then we have a GIF directory that dynamically loads our GIFs. And in this case, to denote that a page is dynamic, we wrap it in curly braces. So here we have our curly braces, and then specifying the parameter ID. And then Next.js has a special API directory for API pages. Essentially, these all get created as serverless functions when we deploy our application. So getGIF, getGIFs, hello, and the vote function are all server-side backend functions that never get sent to the front end. And here we can add all sorts of Node.js functionality to connect to a database, to do any sort of logging, check user session, anything we would do traditionally on the backend, we could do within this API directory. And then we have our utils directory here, and you can name this whatever you want. I just went with utils. And in this case, we only had one utility, which was our connection to MongoDB. And here we brought in the MongoDB Node.js package, connected to our MongoDB database, connected to our client, and we were good to go. So as soon as we were connected, we cached that connection so that we wouldn't have to continuously connect to the database if we had already done it. And then it was just a matter of creating our components, and these components act and behave exactly like traditional React components would. So you can use everything you know from React, React hooks, or the traditional way of writing React components. Here we use React hooks, use state, use effect. Rendering our component and building the UI for it is exactly the same. And then the only other kind of unique thing about Next.js was allowing us to write these GetServerSideProps and I always forget the other one, GetServerSideProps and GetStaticProps. And what these functions and what these methods allowed us to do is to fetch our data ahead of time, either pre-render it completely, pre-render the HTML so our page loads super fast, or get the data before we create the component, so we're still getting all of the niceties of server-side rendering for SEO purposes and things like that. And the good thing about both server-side props, GetServerSideProps and GetStaticProps, is these functions never get exposed to the front end. So if you wanted to use Twilio API keys, for example, or Auth0 API keys, wanted to do anything privileged, you could do it within these methods, and they would never be bundled and sent to the front end. And that's another really big benefit of using Next.js for your next modern application. So I think with that said, I think we can wrap it up. I think we went over everything we didn't get to do last time. And I'll, happy to hang out for a couple of questions. Other than that, I'll open it up back to you, Ahmed, and we'll see what's going on.
Very cool, very cool. It's very cool to see it working, to see everything in good spirits. I think what was most interesting to me is actually, as you said, the kind of server side thing, right, where you can have things that are not running in a console or something like that, and having that available for your application. So that was pretty interesting to see that you can actually do that in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the way that you can kind of glue that server-side functionality with the client-side functionality, where, like what we did here, we, or the ID. So we made a call on the back end to an API, to our API, but this could have been, a third-party API, gotten that data, processed it, and then just passed it as a prop to our React application. And then from there, it's just like building a single page React application where everything you know about React, all of that knowledge is directly transferable.
Yeah.
It's so amazing.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. I mean, thank you so much for doing this talk and actually going back for a part 2 to get everything in working order again.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
If, any parting comments that you want to leave the users with, the viewers?
No, I mean, I highly encourage you to give Next.js a try for your next application, even if you just want to play around with it. And I do work for MongoDB as a senior developer advocate. So if you have any questions about MongoDB or the MongoDB Atlas platform, feel free to reach out. I'm a resource there. My job is to be helpful for developers, help them succeed, and that's what I try to do.
Yeah, exactly. And what was the coupon code again? Because you had a coupon code.
So there is a coupon code. It's ADO 200, which will give you $200 credit for MongoDB Atlas. So MongoDB Atlas actually has a free forever plan that gives you a sandbox to play around and experiment with MongoDB without having to install it and manage it locally. But if you do decide that, hey, this is a great platform, I do want to upgrade and get some of the advanced features or get a dedicated cluster, that $200 will last you a couple months and kind of allow you to scale out and test your application further.
Very good. I've put it on screen so people can see it. Thanks again, Ado. I've put your Twitter on screen as well so people can follow you and interact with you there. And I would leave it there. Thanks
Awesome.
a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.